Kant fans. If you're this far in the Kant study, you're probably a Kant fan or something. So welcome. We are starting the Transcendental Logic today. It's just Pat and I today, looks like. Maybe we'll have someone roll up later, but maybe not, all's well. So, yeah, the logic. Do you have any things?
Okay, I'll pull up. Pop out at the comprehensive yet informal study of the critique of pure reason.
Yes, this is comprehensive. So I think today we're going to try to tackle 1 and 2, which spills into the page that has the third section. And there are only 4 sections, luckily, and they're fairly short each of the introduction, which is called the idea of a transcendental logic. So we're going to get about halfway through that today, I think, if all goes according to plan, and then we'll do the third.
Just to clarify, the introduction of the Transcendental Doctrine of Elements, second part, the Transcendental Logic.
Yeah, if we want to get...
Not the introduction in general.
No, we've gotten past the introduction
many
months ago, thank God, to the actual whole work critique of purity.
Just so that you don't get confused by the fact that it's what?
Introduction in the sense of...
No, there's an introduction to everything.
Yes, so we're going to start that. Usually it's not the most exciting, but it has important things. At least this page I recognize from my undergraduate studies. This is one of my most time spent on pages out of this whole book, at least at this point in my Kant career, or Kant reading time, whatever you want to call that. So yeah, I'm very familiar with this page. It has the very famous phrase, which is right here at the bottom, going on the next page. So we'll get there and through 1 and 2 on logic in general and on transcendental logic. So yeah, if there are no any further thoughts.
I do have a general comment.
Yes.
I think this is probably a better place to start than the transcendental aesthetic.
Probably, yes. I agree. Dr. Lee had us, I think, start with it. Or I think it was all the same homework. I think in the beginning he gave us this and the aesthetic, the space and time and things. So I think, this is usually a good place to start.
Because it actually, explains intuition.
Yeah, which would have been helpful a while ago. We were for an hour and a half for intuition concept.
Fortunately, we knew that, but you, dear listener, probably didn't.
Yeah.
Unless you're, you have some familiarity.
Yeah. Cool. So that's yes, I agree. It's important, and this is I think this will be good just for clarifying on if nothing else. So with that said, I think we can get rolling here on logic in general. We're on the new section. Oh, I am happy. I'm so happy we're on the aesthetic. That shit took forever. Thank God. I'm so repetitive. We'll see if this is like that though. Okay. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll start it off. Sure. Our cognition arises from 2 fundamental sources in the mind. The first of which is the reception of representations, that is, the receptivity of impressions. The second, the faculty for cognizing an object by means of these representations, the spontaneity of concepts. Through the former, an object is given to us. Through the latter, it is thought in relation to that representation, as a mere determination of the mind. That I'm going to stop there because of that sentence, because that's not a good sentence.
Okay.
That's not a good sentence. But to break that down further, there are 2 fundamental sources of cognition, right? Of things that we actually think about. One, receiving things, and the other, us thinking things. He says it's spontaneous, meaning it comes from us. So an object can be given to us directly, as when I see the color red, and then it has to be thought by us in order for me to see an actual red thing and think, oh, that's a red car, or even just that's a red object. Okay, I'm going to continue.
Yep.
So, intuition and concepts, therefore, constitute the elements of all our cognition, so that neither concepts without intuitions corresponding to them in some way, nor intuition without concepts can yield a cognition. Both are either pure or empirical. Empirical if sensation, which presupposes the actual presence of the object, is contained therein, but pure if no sensation is mixed into the representation. One can call the latter the matter of sensible cognition. Thus, pure intuition contains merely the form under which something is intuited, and pure concept only the form of thinking an object in general. Only pure intuition or concept alone are possible a priori, empirical ones only a posteriori.
Yeah, probably going to break this down as well, because just like concepts and the spontaneity of them and intuitions and the receptivity of them, this is another important distinction. So empirical has to, right, what he says here, presupposes actual presence of the object, which I think is a little vague, because if you've been following us this far, you know that, there are like, so to speak, I know I'll use this language later on in the book, noumenal objects, right, which are the object in itself, and then as we have been going through in the aesthetic up to this point of the study, those things get filtered through space and time and become our own kind of object, our own kind of like empirical object. So I don't exactly know what he's saying here, which type of object he's talking about, but at the very least I know it is noumenal. I just don't know if he's also including, like, if he's meaning to talk about empirical objects as well. Because he says an actual presence of the object, which makes me think it's more like noumenal, or like the object in itself.
The actual presence of the object, sorry, where are you seeing this?
So this is right, which is empirical in bold.
Sensation.
Empirical of sensation, which presupposes the actual presence of the object. I'm just trying to figure out if that's talking about like, if that's just saying, oh yes,
No, I don't think so. So I think he's talking at a much more basic level. In order for me to have an object empirically, it first has to actually be present for me in my experience.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so like something has to be put before me in order for me to have an empirical.
Okay, so I guess the details about all the.
Right.
Okay, so.
That's what I think it means.
So save the details for later then.
Well, I do have. I think there's a major point to really bring up.
Okay.
I don't know if he ever comes closer to even just stating his position with regards to cognition, right? Because he says that without both without both kinds of representations, spontaneous representations and given representations, which is to say intuitions and thoughts, right? Or concepts and intuitions, right? You can't have cognition.
Yeah.
What does that mean? He then will later say, right, it's mere intellectual play or empty or whatever.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, is mere intellectual play not cognition? What does cognition mean?
Well, that's kind of like Hegel's point. He's like, it's all cognition. But,
it seems non-defined.
Yeah. Kant thinks you can just have this special kind of. Well, I think his ultimate point is to just kind of say like that isn't something we can just don't worry about it because which is not good. But
yeah, I don't think that is good.
No, it's not good at all. But I do think that this is just working within his own system just for the sake of understanding. I think it's like, yeah, don't worry about things you can't cognize, because very clearly this is all we need. Very clearly we only need
No, it's not. We go back to the multi-dimensional object, right? We can't have an intuition of a fourth spatial dimension at all, right? But we can certainly make predictions based on math which involves 4 dimensions. For instance, I've seen a horse rotated in 4 dimensions using a 3D a modeler, right? Which is pretty weird, but it's certainly possible. It seems like it's a possible object of knowledge, in fact, what the rotation of a horse in 4 dimensions would look like, or a certain shape anyway.
Yeah.
Even a priori knowledge, if you have like a 4-dimensional cube, right? And hypercubes. Propositions about hypercubes are probably a priori knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be the case. It has all the markers of apodictic certainty,
but we don't have
but there's no corresponding intuition.
Yeah. So this is also, yeah, you're right. This is important to bring up. This is a huge thing. I don't want to say Kant scholarship, because that might assume like working within a system, but in like metaphysics, I guess, metaphysics scholarship, this is like people do wonder about how necessary intuitions are. After like doing a whole bunch of like research on it, which I mean, I'm no like PhD scholar or anything, but mainly just for my applications for grad school, I did some reading into intuitions, and I found them like less and less convincing in terms of like their necessity. Which is like what we're saying. Yeah, I've come to similar conclusions. Not exactly like examples of 4D stuff, but just kind of like on its own merit. It's like, do I really need like?
It doesn't seem like I need.
Yeah, exactly.
That yields a particular form of imaginative picture thinking.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to actually be correlated with what we call knowledge in real life.
Yeah. So. Yes, but I don't think anyone would doubt. I think there is definitely value here. Like we do have something like intuitions, I would say. Like
it's certainly true that there is a faculty through which we are given and through which we think.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
The spontaneous faculty in us, I would say, definitely is thinking, and then the faculty which is given to us is not thinking. So you can certainly divide up all elements of experience or all representations in the mind into these two categories.
Yes, and then both of these things can either be empirical, which basically just, if the object is contained in the cognition, it is empirical, but if there's no sensation or anything empirical and it's just purely necessary root from experience, it is called pure. There are pure and empirical intuitions, which Patrick said this might be helpful if you start with this, because then you'll understand pure and empirical intuitions, which was talked about to great length in the aesthetic. And then there are pure and empirical concepts as well. So with this understanding and that basic thing, I think there's definitely onto something here, even if it's not 100% completely apodictic as you'd like it to be. But
sure.
Yes. Okay.
So I can continue.
On, yes.
If we will call.
I don't think we finished the paragraph.
No, we finished the paragraph.
Thus, pure intuition comes merely in form under which something is intuited. I don't think we.
Yeah, we did.
We did. Oh. Okay.
Thus, pure intuition comes from the sun. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
It posterior is the last thing I said. I definitely did. Okay.
All right. Moving on then. Sorry.
If we will call the receptivity of our mind to receive representations, insofar as it is affected in some way, sensibility, then on the contrary, the faculty for bringing forth representations itself, or the spontaneity of cognition, is the understanding. It comes along with our nature that intuition can never be other than sensible, i.e., that it contains only the way in which we are affected by objects. The faculty for thinking of objects of sensible intuitions, on the contrary, is the understanding. Neither of these properties is to be preferred to the other. Without sensibility, no object would be given to us, and without understanding, none would be thought. Thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind. We want to talk about it?
Yeah. So the reason this is weirdly, like, autistically funny to me is just because, like, this is like, well, number one, there's like the Mario.
Do we want to talk about Mario?
I figured it would come up. Let's just
all right, let's just Mario. Let's just fucking read
like, send it in the discourse.
Honestly, I'm just gonna read the Mario thing right now. Phil Jameson, Philosophy 101, 12/18/22, midterm 1. Mario the idea versus Mario the man. Everyone knows Mario is cool as fuck. Horrible opening. But who knows what he's thinking? Who knows why he crushes turtles? And why do we think about him as fondly as we think about the mythical non-existent Dr. Pepper? Perchance. You can't just say perchance. I believe, crossed out, it was Kant who said, experience without theory is blind, but theory without experience is mere intellectual play. Holy shit, there it is. Mario exhibits experience by crushing turts all day. Underlined, stop. But he exhibits theory by stating, let's-a go. Keep it up, baby. When Mario leaves his place of safety to stomp a turdy, he knows he may die. But for a man who can purchase lives with money, a life becomes a mere store of value that can be paid for, much as a rich man feels any law with a fine is a price. We think he's a hero, but he is simply a 1%er of a more privileged society, the light kind, perchance. Okay, so meme aside.
Mark's reading Kant. No, I'm sure
Matt Pat comes in. Mario is communist. All right.
Yeah, well, what a breakthrough paper. So yeah, that was one of the reasons why I thought it was so funny. It's a reference to, what is that called?
Mario the idea versus Mario the man.
Okay. Yeah, and he draws a bit on Kant in that paper through this line, thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without content are blind.
So perfect example of intuition, stomping a turdy. Perfect example of a concept. Let's go. I will not elaborate.
Yes, and the other reason why this line is so important, or perhaps just funny to me and Patrick, is because our undergraduate professor, Dr. Lee, he nailed this in our heads constantly. He drilled this into us. And we somehow still forget the order. And this whole kind of paragraph is building up to this phrase as well. This is kind of the penultimate thing to take away from this section, I think, number 1 on logic in general. And basically what this means is what he just said earlier, is neither of these properties is to be preferred to the other. So to have, this is his epistemological thing in a nutshell, if you were to, water it down, leave out some details, is that you can't have concepts without corresponding intuitions, nor can you have intuitions without corresponding concepts. Otherwise, you're just left with what he calls empty and blind things. Now, we don't exactly know what that means, because we were just talking about, for example, the 4D horse rotation, right? That's perhaps something that would be a concept without a corresponding intuition.
Yeah, the phrase that thoughts without content are empty, to me, actually seems kind of empty. Right?
Yeah, ironically. Yeah,
right? You're saying that these thoughts do not have content, but what does that mean? What is the content of your statement that they don't have content?
Yeah.
Do they, in exactly what regard do they fail? Certainly, they would fail in the regard of having a corresponding intuition, and therefore they are unimaginable thoughts, but unimaginable thoughts aren't necessarily thoughts that don't yield knowledge.
Yes, which is kind of the main disagreement here, is can you have, for what Kant are empty and blind things and not have knowledge? This is much more questionable for us, but for understanding Kant, Kant says no, you need these for knowledge. That's basically what he's saying. You need both equally. There are tons of examples. I don't think we need to go into them. We've already brought a ton of examples about comparing concepts and intuitions in the aesthetic, so I think we can just move on. But as long as you understand that, if you don't feel like looking back and you want an example, let me know. I'll YouTube comment you up with hella examples, because I've had to come up with multiple examples for assignments in class of give an example of an exam is a word that's give an example of a concept without intuition and vice versa. So let me know if you want that example, but for our sake right now, I think we should just move on.
The mere fact that you can give an example of it already suggests that it's a cognition.
Yes, well, that's the thing, is that I think the examples are actually yeah, exactly. Something's wrong. Either the definition is wrong, or he is just wrong, or the example is, or you're misunderstanding the example. It's just, so many about those things are fucking weird. So if you wanted to go into that, let me know. Otherwise, let's get rolling.
It is thus just as necessary to make the mind's concepts sensible, i.e. to add an object to them in intuition, as it is to make intuitions understandable, i.e. to bring them under concepts. Further, these two faculties or capacities cannot exchange their functions. The understanding is not capable of intuiting anything, and the senses are not capable of thinking anything. Only from their unification can cognition arise. But on this account, one must not mix up their roles. Rather, one has great cause to separate them carefully from each other and distinguish them. Hence, we distinguish the science of the rules of sensibility in general, i.e., aesthetic, from the science of the rules of understanding in general, i.e., logic. Would have been great to tell us that before diving into the aesthetic and the logic.
This entire like first two paragraphs shouldn't be on logic in general. It should be in the introduction of the fucking book. Okay, but hopefully if you were confused before, I mean, we spent lots and lots of time clarifying stuff just like
which
this.
We were able to do because we read this already.
But if you are still confused, hopefully this clears it up. If you're still confused, let me know. But they'll probably end up restating it in like 5 different ways anyway, so maybe one of those will clear those up. So if at all you're confused, have hope. There's much repetition and also much support on the internet. Okay. I guess I can read the next part. Now, logic, so thank God we're actually dealing with the subject matter, presumably anyway, in turn, it can be undertaken with 2 different aims, either at the logic of the general or of the particular use of the understanding. The former contains the absolutely necessary rules of thinking, without which no use of the understanding takes place, and it therefore concerns these rules that regard to the difference of the objects to which it may be directed. So this is just saying we have universals and particulars, classic philosophical notion, conundrum perhaps, for some philosophies. But yes, so we have universals and we have particulars, and universals are just that, the universal rules of thinking in general that guide the particulars, which is why so many, like especially rationalists, place importance on them. Cool, so we have universals and we have particulars. Okay, great. So moving on, the logic of the particular use of the understanding contains the rules for correctly thinking about a certain kind of objects. The former can be called elementary logic, the latter, however, the organon of this or that science. In the schools, the latter is often stuck before the sciences as their propedeutic.
So, pedagogical, right? Pedagogical.
Oh, is this like the
yeah? So the derivative, yes. Pedagogy. Oh. Propedeutic, meaning something before pedagogy, before teaching.
Yes. Okay.
So pre-teaching.
So the latter is often okay. So
I think
so
it might be
propedeutic. Of this or that science is usually taught before general. So is he kind of like criticizing schools here?
Though in the course of human reason, they are certainly the latest to be reached. So the latter, the organon of this or that science, it's often stuck before the sciences as they're in the schools. The latter.
But elementary logic, by Kant's reasoning here, should come before the organon of this or that science, right? Because the elementary logic.
Right. Hold on 1 second. Though in the course of human reason, once science is already long complete. Well, this confuses me right here because if I'm understanding correctly, in Kant's time, right, Kant in some way is, Leibniz is sort of a post-scholastic, like late scholastic thinker, and Kant is operating in a Leibnizian Wolffian tradition, right? And scholasticism, of course, always begins with the trivium, right?
Yeah.
Logic, grammar, and rhetoric.
Yeah.
So general logic would be what they teach first. Now, I don't know.
He's just saying in the school. I don't know which schools.
I don't know what schools he's referring to or what their practices were.
Maybe non-scholastic. Maybe it's like
maybe like these new these new fashion schools.
These woke schools are teaching science before logic. What the fuck?
Honestly, kind of based.
Yeah. Wait, who's based?
Kant.
No, okay. Yeah. I was gonna say.
Honestly, kind of based.
I think I agree with this. I think schools should teach logic. There's so much shit I learned about just like in my first year of like college, taking intro to logic, intro to philosophy. Like, oh wow, I would have had a much easier time in this entire fucking subject if I'd understand this like rule or this this way of thinking. But okay, so base critique, if we're understanding that correctly. Okay, so then moving on. Though in the course of human reason they are certainly limits to be reached, once the science is already long complete and requires only the final touch towards improvement and perfection.
I'm not sure what the science here refers to.
The science of logic. So this is actually something. If I'm not mistaken, this I believe he's talking about the science of. Yeah, just the science of logic. Hegel.
Hegel's science of logic.
Hegel mentioned.
That's the first time that's happened.
God, that's such a weird alien loser. Anyway.
Yeah.
Acceptance. But anyway, so what Kant is saying here, and what Hegel would take problem with, is, and honestly, almost all of the post-Kantians, except maybe like Schopenhauer, he says the science of logic is already long complete, requires only final touch for its improvement and perfection. So Kant thinks the logic, especially the kind he's going to present soon with like the categories in the table, which got brought up a few sessions ago. A few months ago, we pulled that table up for something, I don't remember exactly what, but so that kind of logic is what he's talking about. He thinks it's perfected. The post-Kantians are going to say, no, you need to actually derive it using this new system you set up, because they're like, how can you set up this whole, new way of reasoning about analytic and synthetic things and then not have logic to, this idea, I don't know. I'm going too much into it and watering it down too much. But basically, the point here is that Kant thinks logic is just pretty much perfected. Just needs one final touch, which presumably will give it, right? Which is the reason why I writing this book. And other people don't think so. They think you need to derive logic differently, and thus that maybe will change how logic works. But not Kant. Kant is a fan of the old Aristotelian logic and his own logic, which I guess is the final touch that we'll get to later on. So great. Okay. So that is that.
The last sentence of it makes me understand what he's talking about, and it wasn't what you were saying.
Oh.
Right? The last one says, for one must already know the objects rather well if one will offer rules for how a science of them is to be brought about. In other words, if we were to have a logic of physics, I'm not sure how that would work, but anyway, if we were to have a general logic of physics as an organon, introducing that first would be a mistake, because you have to know already the objects of physics.
Yeah, one must already know the objects. Yes, so that's what he's saying there. Okay. Wait, so the ladder. Oh yes, the organon. Okay, so what's he saying? So the organon is already. So what was he saying there then about the organon?
I honestly don't know what an example of a logic used as an organon of this.
No, I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying, like, what is he saying? Like, he's saying it's perfected and, only need one final touch. What is he on about there then?
Let's see. In the schools, let's see.
Because I thought he was talking about logic, and then he goes on to say.
So we would have to know already. Well, keep in mind, when we're talking about sciences, we're probably talking about philosophical sciences, come to think of it. Or mathematics, let's say. That's probably his
I figured he was talking about logic when he's talking about science. Because we're just in logic and talking about different kinds of logic, so I figured the science was one of these logics that he's talking about. Either the elementary logic or the...
No, elementary general logic is its own thing. He's talking about here the use of a specific organon of logic. Right? For understanding a science.
Right.
And he's saying you already have to understand most of the science and then perfect it by adding the organon of logic. So let's take geometry.
That's the final touch. The final touch is knowing the object.
No, the final touch is the logic.
Because the first thing is knowing the object.
Right, exactly. So in geometry,
the final touch is applying logic to the objects. Okay.
I mean, the one that seems to make the most sense to me is that in geometry you wouldn't start with Euclid, if I'm interpreting this correctly. Because Euclid, it does seem like a guy, he's got a method, right? The application of logic in a particular way, he uses proofs, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if we were to study the method of Euclid, that would be an organon of geometry.
Right.
But you would already want to be familiar with the objects of geometry, namely things like planes or lines, parallel,
Points,
perpendicular, points, all that stuff. You would already want to know it and know it well before being able to study the organon of logic for geometry. I think that's what he's talking about.
Okay.
To be honest, none of this is relevant to the main crux of Kant's a priori synthetic. It's all a tangent.
Yeah, the more I'm like thinking about it, the more I'm getting confused. Just the whole, I mean, I'm understanding what he's saying, but I'm getting confused like why he's here and why he's on about this. But okay, okay, Kant.
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah. Oh well. Man, I don't know. I thought that was really relevant. I thought he was going on about how he thinks logic is perfected. Well, he will say that at some point later. I know that because I've read that part and we've gone over it.
I don't know.
Shattering of Reason, where he's like, "Oh yes, the logicians have it correct." I might be coming up soon. I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll see.
Right.
So what I said is true, just not for this thing, and we'll get to what I was saying later. And
It just wasn't this part.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it just was worded almost.
Yeah, no,
Exactly
he talks
how
about
it
that when it's like he's talking about Aristotle.
Yeah, he's like the logicians had it correct. I think this
It was like,
is almost verbatim.
I mean, yeah, logic has been the same since Aristotle, and it'll never change.
I wonder if his newfound insights into cognition will change how logic works. Anyway,
Definitely not.
Nah, what the fuck is a dialectic? Well, he'll show us what a dialectic is later. Okay, moving on.
You or me.
Oh, I guess I thought he did. General logic is either pure or applied logic. In the former, we abstract from all empirical conditions under which our understanding is exercised, that is, from the influence of the senses, from the play of imagination, the laws of memory, the power of habit, inclination, etc. Hence also from the sources of prejudice, indeed in general, from all causes from which certain cognitions arise or may be supposed to arise, because these merely concerning the understanding under certain circumstances of its application and experience is required in order to know these. So this is a really wordy way of just saying, yeah, just abstract from everything that's not completely logically necessary, and that is pure, or that is, or not pure, that is the former. Yeah, so okay, so that's general logic. Or no, pure, so that's pure logic.
Well,
yes,
he enumerates it specifically because this is one of the closer examples. He comes to giving us examples of what the hell he's talking about.
Yeah.
Namely, for instance, common fallacies. Can you actually let's just finish the paragraph and then talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So a general pure logic, therefore, has to do with strictly a priori principles and is a canon of the understanding, which is a phrase I never really understood well now. An understanding, but only in regard to what is formal in their use, be the content what it may, empirical or transcendental. A general logic, however, is then called applied if it is directed to the rules of the use of the understanding under the subjective empirical conditions that psychology teaches us. There's a word I'm missing. I think I cut off the page. What is that for us?
It therefore.
It therefore has empirical principles, although it is to be
Sure.
general
Insofar.
Okay. Oh, let me continue. Insofar as it concerns the use of the understanding without regard to the difference of objects. On this account, it is also neither a canon of the understanding general nor an organon of particular sciences, but merely a cathartic of the common understanding. Okay.
I don't know what the hell a cathartic is in this context, but it seems generally what he's talking about here is the difference between rules of formal logic, for instance, if A then B, if B then C, then if A then C, etc., right? Or all cats are mammals, Rex is a cat, that's normally a dog name, but whatever. Therefore, Rex is a mammal, that kind of logic, right? Those logical rules are general and pure. The examples I gave aren't, but they are examples of general pure logic, whereas the applied logic seems to be talking about things like fallacies. For instance, the appeal to authority fallacy, or the gambler's fallacy, right? Awareness of the subjective conditions of the human psyche. So, for instance, he says, we abstract from laws of memory, power of habit, inclination, and sources of prejudice. So, in other words, with applied logic, we are no longer abstracting from our subjective psychological
But I wouldn't
differences.
say you're falling into bad logic. I think that's just...
No. He's saying that applied logic is the avoidance of these things.
Oh, no. Well,
It's logic that takes into account how the human mind actually works empirically.
yes.
Right? And the examples of that would be understanding common fallacies of logic.
Sure, yeah.
Because those fallacies we only know are common through empirical experience, even if that's our own internal experience of cognitive bias.
Yeah.
Right? Clear?
Yes,
Cool.
because fallacies are not at all a priori.
Right, exactly. A logical fallacy is not a priori. Unless it's a logical fallacy like affirming the consequent. That's a priori.
Yes, but that's not the same kind of fallacy. Is
I
it?
know,
They're
exactly.
all-
It's
different
it's
kinds
a
of
different
fallacies.
exactly. That's the difference between pure and applied logic.
Yes.
That difference is the difference between pure and applied logic.
Great, I agree.
Okay. Even though both are general, he says both are general because neither of them is applied to a specific subject.
Yes. Great, okay. That makes sense to me.
Okay. In general logic, the part that is to constitute the pure doctrine of reason must therefore be entirely separated from that which constitutes applied, though still general logic. The former alone is properly science, although brief and dry as the scholastically correct presentation of a doctrine of elements of the understanding requires. In this, therefore, logicians must always have two rules in view. As general logic, it abstracts from all contents of the cognition of the understanding and from the difference of its objects. It has to do with nothing but the mere form of thinking. As pure logic, it has no empirical principles, thus it draws nothing from psychology, as one has occasionally been persuaded, which therefore has no influence at all on the canon of the understanding. It is a proven doctrine, and everything in it must be completely a priori. What I call applied logic, in opposition to the common signification of the word, according to which it ought to contain certain exercises to which pure logic gives the rule, is thus a representation of the understanding and its rules of necessary use in concreto, namely under the contingent conditions of the subject, which can hinder or promote its use, and which can be given only empirically. It deals with attention, its hindrances and consequences, the cause of error, the condition of doubt, of reservation, of conviction, etc. And general and pure logic is related to it as pure morality, which contains merely the necessary moral laws of free will in general, is related to the doctrine of virtue proper, which assesses these laws under the hindrances of the feelings, inclinations, and passions to which human beings are more or less subject, and which can never yield a true and proven science, since it requires empirical and psychological principles just as much as that applied logic does. Once again, I would like you to remind everyone that science for Kant, for Hegel, for really anyone up until like the middle of the 19th century, and there's a reason for this, means the opposite of what we would call science now. It means basically math and philosophy and logic, things that we can actually literally know, right? Natural philosophy is what we would call science. What they call natural philosophy is what we call science. And natural philosophy is a more fitting name for it than science, right? Because the word science is derived from the Greek scientia, right? The word science means scientia, to know, right? No scientific propaganda is known with perfect certainty. Not propaganda. Scientific propaganda. Yeah. Proposition. That's a Freudian slip if you ever heard one. No, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I swear, guys. No.
We promise.
we promise. The Earth's round and all that shit. Climate change and the vaccine. I fucking love
natural philosophy.
I fucking love natural philosophy. However, 2 + 2 = 4 is absolutely fucking certain. Totally, completely correct. Gravity, right? So 2 + 2 = 4 is
real science.
Is real science. Exactly, is real science.
Positivist fucking. I only know. Oh my gosh, dude. I only know what's presented to me through science.
Goofy philosophy.
Dude, yeah, it's cool. Positivists like inverted the relationship. It's like gravity is like, oh yes, this is like the most certain, but then ethics is just the only thing of philosophy we need left because of that, and also ethics is like weird. So like, yeah, not certain, speculation, yeah, but we do need philosophy for it because for some reason it's important.
Can't even do metaphysics in Ohio.
No, not positivist Ohio. You cannot do metaphysics. You will. G.E. Moore's ghost will come and fucking chop your hands off. Here's one hand, here's another.
For those of you who don't get the joke, it's not worth explaining. You can get it or you don't.
Just look up G.E. Moore. God, one of my least favorite philosophers ever. Clearly never read anything like we're doing now. If you're here, I would argue you're a better philosopher than G.E. Moore. Just because, faculties, you need to comprehend this book and its explanations. You are already at a higher level than G.E. Moore ever was. God, how did that guy get an academic career?
Shots fired.
Okay,
dude.
yeah, I'm shooting so many shots. We
You're
get back
just
to
shooting.
this.
You're just shooting at G. Moore. All right.
God.
One thing I wanted to draw attention to is back where it says 2. Pure logic has no empirical principles, thus it draws nothing from psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, what does he mean by psychology here?
Like
right.
The rules of the mind and how in terms of like not its logical rules.
Notice how the Critique of Pure Reason is a book about the rules of the mind, right? According to the Critique of Pure Reason.
No, that's not I don't think that's what he means by psychology. Because psychology meant something different than what we.
Are we sure though? Because the laws of logic, right, are the laws of thought. No, but scientific or natural philosophical.
Oh, you know what? No, I think psychology for him, which would help be helpful to explain it now. But I think at some point later it does say it has to deal with like the rules of the self.
Well, exactly.
It's like the subjective science.
Okay, exactly. But if it's a subjective science, the understanding itself can only be known through subjective science, namely psychology.
Like I want to agree with you. I'm just trying to go with like what Kant, and this might be a weird thing with Kant, but I don't know what he like thinks about that.
I think I know what he means. Actually, it's just like he uses words wrong. Well, what we call psychology, as a matter of fact, right? For us, psychology would be an empirical study of the mind, right? And he says that there are no empirical principles, right, in pure logic.
Yeah.
There's no psychology, meaning empirical psychology, meaning we don't think about how the human mind works per se. But we do, because the whole thing, logic itself, is only about what the human mind is. Right? Is that not his claim? They're part of the filter. It's part of the filter through which.
Claim.
No, why not? Because only intuition is part of the. Because well, does logic apply to the thing in itself as it is in the human mind? Like, does logic in the human mind apply to the thing in itself?
The thing in itself, no.
No. So in other words,
but this is weird because then he thinks that that's something else.
In other words, logic is part of the filters.
Oh, you're saying by his own standards. Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Okay. I see what you're saying now. Yes. Okay. So by his own standards,
it should be
this
psychological.
would be psychology.
Yeah.
But from like actual, like no Numina bullshit, they are different. Okay. Yes. Okay. I don't know.
I know what he means, but I'm just saying that, like, according to him,
yes, they should be the same.
it should be,
Or they should fall under the
the
same.
question becomes, is what Kant's
They're all the
doing
same.
empirical or a priori? What is the nature of the cognition that produces the critique of pure reason? What is the nature of the cognition that investigates the faculties? He just says attend to your faculties. No, is that empirical?
It's probably what you would call transcendental, no? Isn't this the kind of one of the reasons?
But he defines all cognition as either empirical or pure. Right? So what is the cognition that...
Did he mean it though? I don't know.
I don't know. But what kind of cognition tells us that we have an understanding and a sensibility? Is that empirical or pure cognition?
I think he sides later on with empirical because because the way we come to know that is through the eye, and the eye I think he says is an empirical.
Which seems like it's a big problem. I mean, honestly, that seems like it's a more fundamental problem than the semantics here, actually. Because how do we know the laws of logic? Empirically. By examining our own consciousness.
Logic's a scam.
I mean, like, if this is empirical. On the other hand, if it's pure, then it would seem that it would have to be necessary and universal. But it's not necessary and universal that we are given space and time.
Yes, because...
By his own admission. Yeah. So it seems like he's caught in a self-defeating trap here.
I mean, this is the theme throughout the whole fucking thing. This is why there's so many post-Kantians, I think, because he says such true things, but then he organizes it in such a way that one thing is more important than the other, and there's a thing in itself, and because of that structure, by his own system, things fall apart, but taken in isolation, you get a really good insight. Like this number 2.
Yeah, I feel like the need to restate this, actually, because I feel like the problem, you got it, but I feel like the listener may or may not get it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to restate my problem here, which number 2 has just sort of made me realize, right? For Kant, all cognition is either pure or empirical. Pure, meaning a priori, coming without any need for actual experience, or empirical, a result of experience. Now, cognition includes all knowledge, right? Not all cognition is knowledge, but all knowledge is cognition. And Kant is asserting that he has knowledge of various propositions in the critique. Namely, for instance, for example, right, that there is the understanding in our mind, and also there is sensibility. Is, for example, the proposition, I have sensibility and understanding, a result of pure or empirical cognition? If pure cognition, how do we know that, how is this necessary and universal? Because he has to say that every pure cognition is necessary and universal a priori, right? Well, it doesn't seem necessary and universal that all sentient beings, right, have this division. In fact, he asserts the exact opposite. He says we can easily conceive and do conceive of a being that does not have this separation, that is non-discursive, namely God, right? He says we have such an idea, even though we don't have cognition of God. So, therefore, it's not a priori universal. The only alternative remaining is that it's empirical. But if it's empirical, then it is not apodictically certain. If it's empirical, then we can't know that this is actually the case for sure, which he claims we can. So it seems like Kant has defeated himself.
He has. That was a great demonstration. Thank you. God. So just as a general thing, if you want to get value out of Kant, please don't take him for his word at every turn, because he will often get himself in trouble like this. I can guarantee you, I have not gone through this holding myself, which is honestly the main reason why I'm doing this study in the first place. But I've gone through enough of it to know that this is not the only time he does this. If you want a thorough Kant cringe, where he contradicts himself compilation, literally Arthur Schopenhauer has a section at the end of his first book, which is first big book, which is called World as Will and Representation, and he kind of takes you through all the examples of where Kant runs into trouble like this.
It's so funny. You started this as such a Kant style, and like now, like we're not even close to halfway through, but already you're like, Kant's pretty cringe, bro.
No, I mean,
but he's great.
He's great.
He's completely necessary, but we're just gonna criticize him and rip him apart on every sentence.
I didn't expect to have to do as much. I'm like, okay, maybe Schopenhauer just was like, I don't know.
No.
maybe because I didn't read a lot of it, especially at the time when we started this. I was like, okay, maybe Schopenhauer just has some issues with it because of his own philosophy. No, this is all just Kant getting caught up in himself. So, oh god, okay. So yes, he's great, but please don't take everything verbatim. This is the ultimate lesson here, and this is a great example of number 2 that contradiction. Okay. All that said, I think we can move on to the last paragraph here.
No, I did that actually and went back. You forgot. I actually did that and I just went back to 2. I did that last paragraph.
No, you're right. Yeah, because I recognized the last sentence. Okay. Cool. We are done with this section. I don't know if you still want to do the second one.
It's pretty short. Yeah. It's literally a page.
Okay.
You want to read it?
Sure. Yeah. Let's do it. Okay. General logic abstracts, as we have, new section on transcendental logic, here we go. General logic abstracts, as we have shown, from all content of cognition, i.e. from any relation of it to the object, and considers only the logical form in the relation of cognitions to one another, i.e. the forms of thinking in general. But now, since there are pure as well as empirical intuitions, as the transcendental aesthetic proved, sure. A distinction between pure and empirical thinking of objects could also well be found. In this case, there would be a logic in which one did not abstract from all content of cognition, for that logic that contained merely the rules of the pure thinking and of an object would exclude all those cognitions that were of empirical content. It would therefore concern the origins of our cognitions of objects insofar as they cannot be ascribed to the objects, while general logic, on the contrary, has nothing to do with this origin of cognition, but rather considers representations, whether they are originally given a priori in ourselves or only empirically, merely in respect of the laws according to which the understanding brings them into relation to one another when it thinks, and therefore deals only with the form of the understanding, which can be given to the representations wherever they may have originated. Dear God, that was a mouthful. Okay. So what is he actually saying here? It's hard for me to analyze it when I'm reading it first.
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. So let's just go back and go through it then.
Let me see.
Yeah. So general logic abstracts from content of cognition.
So there's pure, I'm just going to start with, there are pure and empirical intuitions, sure. Mm-hmm. Then there's pure and empirical thinking. Okay, that could make sense. He's saying we found pure and empirical intuitions. Mm-hmm. It would seem logical then that we could have pure and empirical thought.
Right, because they need to be tied to each other in this system, as he explained earlier.
Because Kant is obsessed with symmetries even when they don't make sense.
Yeah.
But this probably does. This one probably does make sense though. In this case, there would be a logic in which one did not abstract from all content of cognition. Right? For that logic contained merely the rules of pure thinking. What? There would be a logic in which one did not abstract from all content.
Oh, is he just basically saying there's a logic that deals with empirical content?
Ah, yes. There is a logic that deals with empirical content. Right.
Okay. Sure.
Namely, a logic that deals with content as bound by the rules of time and space.
Yeah, this is shit like cause and effect. Everything he's talking about?
Yes.
Causality.
However, no, it shouldn't be. Did not abstract from all content, for that logic that contained merely the rules of pure thinking of an object would exclude all those cognitions that were of thinking of empirical content.
Yeah, so he's basically saying.
But hold on, but there's a problem here.
Okay.
Right. Content is not supplied merely by empirical intuition. It's also supplied by pure intuition.
No, but that's why he's focusing on the empirical right here, because he's saying we can't. Because okay, so he's saying.
But hold on.
Okay.
When he talks about the general logic, right? General pure logic.
Yeah.
He says we abstract from all content. Now he says, in contrast, right? In this case, there would be a logic where one did not abstract from all content.
Right, because he's introducing the non-general logic.
Right, but there's a general logic. There would also be a general logic where you do not abstract from content, which is pure. Namely, logic that deals with pure intuitions, which is what you'd expect he would call transcendental logic.
Yeah. Isn't that what he's saying, though?
No, because that wouldn't be empirical content at all.
Oh, so
It would be pure. It would be.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying here?
Because the pure intuitions.
Because it seems like he's trying to call logic that deals with the conditions of space and time empirical logic, which is a problem because they're not empirical; they're pure. Yes, as we just went over. Yes, that's what it seems like he's trying to do.
So easy to
I could be wrong, but it's not because they're pure, right? That would be transcendental logic, I suppose, if you wanted to have a name different from pure general logic.
Well, this section is on transcendental logic.
Empirical or transcendental. Yeah, so he says earlier, the canon of understanding and reason, but only in regard to what is formal in their use, be the content what it may, empirical or transcendental. So he does recognize that distinction. Okay. For a logic that contained merely the rules of pure thinking of an object would exclude all those cognitions that were of empirical content. I'm just going to continue on thinking. I'll let him cook. Okay. It would therefore concern the origin of our cognitions of objects insofar as they cannot be ascribed to objects.
Hold up, boy.
What?
It would therefore concern the origin of our cognitions of objects. So it's basically just saying what comes before that. Like, what are the preconditions for the objects?
Yes. Well, I would think it would contain the spontaneity.
Yes.
He's talking about the spontaneity here.
Oh, so what comes in our cognition before objects?
Not before objects, but as a result of ourselves rather than objects. The representations which are not given to us by the object, but which are produced.
By saying origins.
Not necessarily, no. So, for instance,
right?
well, no. For example, if I have the concept of a squirrel, maybe I've never seen a green squirrel in my life or never thought of one, right? But I see something that appears to be a squirrel, which is green, right? And then, so first I have the empirical intuitions, and then I develop a concept. So that's after, in time.
Yeah.
Right? But it's still spontaneous, right? It comes from me rather than the object. Anyway.
Okay.
But rather considers representations whether they are originally given a priori in themselves or only empirically, merely in respect of laws, according to which the understanding brings them into relation with one another and thinks, when it thinks, and therefore it deals only with the form of the understanding. Oh, he just described general logic again. The second half of this paragraph is just him explaining what general logic is again.
No, is it?
Yes, while general logic, right from here, while general logic, on the contrary, has nothing to do with the origin of cognition, but rather considers representations, whether they are originally given a priori in themselves or only empirically, or merely in respect to the laws in accordance to which...
Oh, that part.
Yeah, he's literally just saying this again.
I got scanned into thinking he was having like a new insight.
Okay.
It's because the way he's like throwing these words around, it makes it seem like he's hinting at like, oh, there's a science that like by which we analyze objects of our experience and using the understanding we like create relations between them. I'm like, oh, he's just setting up his thing for this
really not sure where he's going with this so far, but let's keep going.
Yes.
And I hear make a remark. No.
Here I make a remark.
Oh. And here I make a remark. the import of which extends to all of the following considerations, and that we must keep well in view, namely, that not every a priori cognition must be called transcendental, but only that by which it means we cognize that and how certain representations are applied entirely a priori or are possible. Certain representations, intuitions, and concepts, we already know that those are the two kinds of representations, so let's not be redundant here, are applied a priori or are possible, i.e. the possibility of cognition or its use a priori. Right, he's saying basically that which is transcendental concerns the possibility of cognition or the use of cognition a priori.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to me.
Yes.
Hence, neither space nor any geometrical determination of it a priori has a transcendental representation. What? What?
So, but only the cognition that these representations are not of empirical origin. Yeah, so that's just saying because that's not space nor any geometry. Oh, wait, space. I was only focusing on geometrical determination. Yes,
a priori is a transcendental representation, but only the cognition that these representations are not of empirical origin at all, and the possibility that they can nevertheless be related a priori to objects of experience can be called transcendental. Okay, so in other words, that not every a priori can be called transcendental, but only that by means we which that and how certain representations are applied entirely a priori. In other words, not what. So for instance, not 2 + 2 = 4. That's not a transcendental proposition. Yeah. Rather, a proposition that tells us how we are able to say 2 + 2 = 4 is transcendental. Okay, makes sense.
So the weird thing with space here is because space is supposed to be telling us how, right? Space should be transcendental, I think, right? I'm still hung up on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Hence, space nor any geometrical determination of it a priori is transcendental representation.
I get the geometrical determination, it is not transcendental. That's just
right.
But space, he kind of had a whole. He was making what I thought were transcendental propositions about space.
Maybe he's talking about
the transcendental aesthetic.
Maybe he's not talking about the existence of space, but the nature of it. Namely, in that it has 3 dimensions, for example.
Yes, that's not transcendental. That's just a priori.
Wow, as we've been over, is that a priori? Is that empirical or a priori? Or pure? Yeah, like how do we know space has 3 dimensions? Empirically, through experience, or pure?
Kant would say pure.
It's given to us.
I don't want to answer that question right now.
Anyway, okay, so continuing. Likewise, the use of space about all objects in general would be transcendental. But if it is restricted solely to the objects of the sentence, then it is called empirical. The difference between transcendental and the empirical therefore belongs only to the critique of cognitions and does not concern their relation to their object. Yeah. The critique of... Excuse me, again. The critique of cognitions... and basically he's saying that in order to be transcendental, it has to be very general. It's talking about how cognitions are possible rather than any particular cognition relating directly to the object.
So if this were like an already popularized term, the title of the book would probably be like Transcendental, like critique of pure reason or something. Yeah.
Sure, pretty much, yeah.
Because that's kind of
well, no, it's not. It's a critique of pure reason. It's not purely transcendental.
Okay, yeah. Okay, but yeah, I guess just a large amount of it is, right?
Most of it is, in fact, transcendental. But I'm not sure the ideal of pure reason is transcendental, for instance.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway. In the expectation, therefore, that there perhaps can be concepts that may be related to objects a priori, not as pure or sensible intuitions, but rather merely as acts of pure thinking, that are thus concepts, but neither empirical nor aesthetic origin, we provisionally formulate the idea of a science of pure understanding, of the pure cognition of reason, by means of which we think objects completely a priori. Such a science, which would therefore determine the origin, the domain, and the objective validity of such cognitions, would have to be called transcendental logic, since it has to do merely with the laws of understanding and reason, but solely insofar as they are related to objects a priori, and not, in the case of general logic, to empirical as well as pure cognitions of reason without distinction. Yeah, I don't get it. And I definitely need to.
Yes.
This is important, and I don't understand the section.
So I think, okay, the expectation therefore, nice. Rather is merely acts of pure thinking. Okay, so, you're right, concepts are not any kind of intuition, they are pure thinking. Thus concepts are neither pure science. So he's basically saying that the
Good
sun...
afternoon, Drew Library patrons. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon. The time right now is 4:30. I want to give you a heads up. We're going to our Friday evening study hours in a half hour from now at 5 o'clock. Love to have you stay with us. If you choose to do so, please be sure you have your Drew ID card with you, as you will need that to get back in the building between 5 and 8 when the doors are locked. Once again, study hours begin in a half hour at 5 p.m. and the library closes this evening at 8.
Okay, so he's basically just taking a really long time to say that. I think what he's saying is that concepts are, which is weird that this goes back to, I think, why it's weird that we need intuitions and concepts equally to have knowledge, because by this standard maybe transcendental logic wouldn't be knowledge, because I think he's saying that this doesn't deal with intuitions at all in terms of like having them to make these judgments. I think he's saying these are concepts of the pure understanding and of pure cognition.
But pure understanding isn't necessarily intuition free. Pure understanding...
Maybe not necessarily, but in this case I think it is.
Well, pure understanding would operate with space and time.
Yes, would operate with it, but I don't think it would have any like effect on...
So, for instance, one thing I know later is he talks about the concept of subsistence.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether he talks about it in the Transcendental Logic or what, or the Transcendental Analytic, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But he talks about the idea of subsistence as a concept that requires the pure intuition of time.
Okay.
For instance, Hume criticized substance, right?
Yeah.
This notion of an enduring thing.
Yeah.
Kant says we formulate the idea of substance a priori by thinking about succession without change, right? In certain objects or in certain respects.
Yeah.
So therefore, the concept of succession exists a priori in the mind, and it is a pure concept. However, it only exists due to our concept of time.
Yes.
Not concept, but our intuition of time.
So, but this is different because the transcendental logic is supposed to be even, I guess, like higher up, maybe you would say, on that like scale or like that system, because no intuitions are involved in. I mean, maybe they're involved necessarily, but they don't have an effect. Like the judgments are made up of concepts. Right, which is what I think this first.
Well, when he talks about general pure logic, he says that we abstract away from all intuitions, which it's not clear why that gets to yield knowledge and nothing else does.
Exactly. Well, okay, but I think if you take that and be like, okay, then this is concepts that we're dealing with, and we're using these concepts to make judgments about, to make transcendental judgments. That is the transcendental. That is the transcendental logic. That science.
I don't think I understood what you said.
So we're abstracting away from even like pure intuitions, and we're just in the realm of concepts. And these concepts are capable of making a priori propositions about.
That just sounds like the general logic, though. That sounds like the general pure logic.
But it's specifically about the preconditions of like experience, for example, or not for example, but in my words, and that is what he's calling the transcendental logic. Like pure concepts formulating a priori propositions about preconditions of experience. That's why I would sum this up as.
I don't think I understand it still. And here I make a remark that the import of which, okay, I understand what is a transcendental representation or cognition, right? So let me run the paragraph back. In the expectation, therefore, that there can perhaps be objects that may be related to objects a priori, or concepts that may be related to objects a priori. Okay, makes sense. Not as pure or sensible intuitions, but rather merely as acts of pure thinking. What? Why do you have that expectation? What does it mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
What would it mean for him to have a concept which is related not without any pure or sensible intuition, but merely as an act of pure thinking?
Well, so this is what I was trying to get. I think that in this classic fashion of like, okay, yeah, your conclusion, figure out how it works. So we have the conclusion of the transcendental logic that talks about, the preconditions for like things in our mind and things of experience. So what I'm thinking is that Kant is just saying that's what transcendental logic is. It's these pure concepts that relate to, the objects of our experience and our understanding, but obviously they're abstracted away from it because they're talking about it transcendentally.
But how that would seem like it is not a science because it's not even cognition.
Well, again, this is why I feel like he's contradicting himself, because he's claiming to have knowledge of these things, right? It's all logic, it's transcendental logic. So assuming, you can a priori know these things, but they don't have intuitions corresponding to them. Yes, I agree that is contradictory, but I think that's still what he's saying.
I'm going to keep reading. That are thus concepts of neither empirical nor aesthetic origin. We provisionally formulate the idea of a science of pure understanding and of the pure cognition of reason, by means of which we think objects completely a priori. Such a science, which would determine the origin, domain, and the objective of validity of such cognitions, would have to be called transcendental logic. How are you doing that without intuitions?
I don't know, but you are, I guess. Well, maybe they're there, but again, they're not really having an effect on the judgments.
But they are, right? They're the whole essence of the critique of pure reason.
No, they are. The essence of the critique of pure reason, at least up to this point, is the transcendental, has been the transcendental aesthetic really up to this point, and which has been transcendental propositions about what space and time are, and I don't know if space and time are having an effect on those judgments.
What has to be called transcendental logic, since it has merely to do with the laws of understanding of reason, but solely insofar as they relate to objects a priori, not in the case of general logic to empirical as well as pure cognitions of reason without distinction. That's the one that provides the largest clue, right? Because I understand what he's talking about when he says pure general logic. So the difference between pure general and transcendental logic is that transcendental logic only concerns objects as they are related a priori.
No, but it's more like the how, right? That identifies as transcendental,
How much do you feel like you understand this as you were trying to explain it? Because I feel like you might understand it more than I am.
I mean, that's what my interpretation makes sense to me. I don't know if that's like the right one, but so this is so if, to make maybe more sense of it, I think Kant is doing a classic thing of like that he likes to do, where he likes to, even though things are always like interplaying and whatever are important with each other, I think he still tries to separate them, just to like identify them.
What is he separating?
He's separating like the intuitions. In this case, he's doing that with the intuitions and like these concepts, you know, whether they're acts of pure thinking. Because you're saying, right, how are you doing that without intuitions? I don't think you actually are, but I think he's saying that the area he's focusing on, specifically the transcendental logic, that the intuitions aren't having an impact on these propositions other than the fact that the intuitions are just there.
I think that makes some sense, but the only thing is now, I don't understand how it would actually differ in general logic in regards to its content, right? Because anything
because the content differs is because the content is defined by how, at least the way I understand it, with transcendental and general. So in my view, this is almost like a subdivision of general logic, which I don't think he's trying to do.
But are there additional rules that apply to transcendental logic that would not apply to general logic?
No, which is why, at least not to my understanding, which is why I think it's more like a subcategory that he's identifying.
But the only subcategory is that it's not a separate science at all. It's just the same science,
but you're asking how instead of just anything else.
Where are you getting the how anyway?
We just went over. Let me find it in the text, but it's when we were going over. Right here in the student paragraph. And here I make, I'll just read it. And here I make a remark, the import of which extends to all of the following considerations that we must keep well in view, namely that not every a priori cognition must be called transcendental, but only that by means of which we cognize that and how certain representations, intuitions, or concepts are applied entirely a priori or are possible. That is the possibility of cognition.
I think I understand.
Okay.
So you're saying this is the general logic. He's not adding anything to general logic. Rather, he is exclusively focusing on those elements of general logic which are necessary to his purpose of explaining transcendental philosophy.
Yes.
Okay. I think I understand. I'm going to try to break that down.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know how I would break that down any further.
Into like something that, I mean, I had trouble. Yeah. So to try to break that down, I would say, right, if you have been following what general pure logic is, Kant's purpose is for us to understand transcendental cognition, i.e., the synthetic a priori judgments that make experience possible. This requires that he uses general pure logic, but he only needs to talk about the part of general pure logic which concerns these transcendental propositions.
Yes.
So, the part of general pure logic that is concerned only with why and how, that transcendental element of cognition, why and how are a priori, like basically, how are a priori synthetic judgments possible? Well, let's look at logic, but only the part of logic that has to do with that question.
Yes, that is transcendental logic in bold right here.
Okay, I think I understand.
Base. Okay, and actually no, that's it. That's the end of the parts we wanted to cover today, and we're almost out of time anyway, so that works out. Cool. I think any closing or clarifying general statements we would want to make were probably covered somewhere in there. And yeah, Kant contradicts himself sometimes. A lot of what we just said is not aligned with, this suppose what I thought for a while was just this Kantian axiom that thoughts of the content are empty, intuitions of that content are blind. So we're already kind of pushing that to its limit with this further discussion, which is interesting.
It does seem to be self-defeating. It doesn't
Yes.
really seem like he's doing the kind of cognition that would be necessary under his system to have anything called knowledge.
Yes, by virtue of practicing the transcendental logic, he seems to already be like slipping away from intuitions. Intuitions, I don't think they're as fundamental as Kant says he is, for the reason that Kant kind of says himself right here and the rest of it. So yeah, I guess those are my closing statements. Interesting, paradoxical, but I think there are lots of good insights here, and we're going to do some even more fun divisions next time. But to be honest, this is infinitely more interesting. Maybe not infinitely, but at least right now for me, it's a lot more interesting than the transcendental aesthetic. Hopefully, it is for whoever else is on into this as well, especially because we spent so long with the aesthetic. So this is a nice mix-up for me. We'll see how next time goes on the division of logic into analytic and dialectic. Actually, that does sound particularly interesting.
Yeah,
so,
my final thoughts.
Yeah.
Ich kann lesen und Mario spielen. Wie cool ist das? Yippee!
Good clip. Alright, well, on that note, we will see you next time for the continuation of, for this part that you're seeing on the screen right here, number 3. We'll see you